Hey everyone, glad you could join us tonight. It's really, can folks hear me in the back okay? Okay, great. It's good to see folks here. Thank you for joining us to think about a resilient climate future for our valley. My name is Corey Miller. I'm the director at Friends of the Mad River. I have a colleague right here, Ira Shaddis, and there are several board members of Friends of the Mad River in the audience tonight. We would like to welcome you in partnership with the Mad River Valley Planning District. We're hosting our second community climate chat. Thanks for being here this evening. I want to first off take a moment to say a heartfelt thanks to George and Helen and the Flatbread team for allowing us to be here and keeping us well fed and in this beautiful space in our community. So thank you. So just a quick moment, Friends of the Mad River's mission is to steward the healthy land and clean water of our community for our community and future generations and for now. So we're really excited to be thinking about a climate resilient future, and we're thinking a lot about how we can support our community coming into conversation to figure that out. How do we want to do that here? How can we face change and sort of meet it with the opportunities and the excitement and the creativity that is this community? And our goal is to help this community be strong and resilient, and we're really started these community climate chats because we think that having conversations with our community is one of the steps that we need to take, and just really starting to understand one another and understand the data and understand our opportunities. So thanks for being part of that. The climate change isn't something we can tackle alone. It's going to take all of us digging deep, but it's also going to take us coming together, like I said. And there are many opportunities. Many of you are taking opportunities already to become climate resilient, to do things to sort of minimize the impacts of climate change, and thank you for that. I want to tell you about one opportunity in specific. You're going to hear about lots this evening, but over here on the wall is the Ridge to River 2.0 sign up. So Ridge to River 1.0 began in 2015 when a group of folks came together from across the 5 towns to become more flood resilient. And there are some of these people in the audience tonight, but we worked together for 7 years to really, across the municipal lines, with town municipal representatives and with interested community members, to really plan, to really research and then plan and then act for flood resilience and clean water. And so last year, this group decided that sort of broadening the focus to be about climate resilience made a lot of sense. So we're going to try to take the lessons that we learned from that experience over those 7 years with Ridge to River, the things that worked really well and the things that we learned from, and replicate that as we think about our climate resilience for our community. So right now it's a group of people that are getting together to try to learn together, to think about working groups, how they want to dive in, and how we want to learn more and start to act towards climate change. So please sign up. We had our first meeting of Ridge to River 2.0 last Thursday, and it was great. And I invite you, everyone's welcome, and we're going to co-create the future of that group and hopefully have as many successes as we did the first time around with Ridge to River for flood resilience. Let's see, where am I? I gotta make sure I hit all this. You sign up. Oh, yeah, I wanted to remind folks, there's a table also in the back. Please, we're interested to hear your ideas about what our community can do for climate resilience. We're interested to hear what you think are opportunities, what you think are challenges. So there's some markers and a big butcher paper in the back on a table. So if you get a moment tonight, just any time, to go over there and write a few thoughts down, that would be really valuable to us. And it'll help us shape the future of these climate chats. And the exciting thing about this evening and about on July 5th was the expertise in the room. If you look around, we know how to do this. We know how to face resilience and build a resilient community. Many people here are doing different things that are related to that. And one of the groups, thanks to the Mad River Valley Planning District for hosting these events with us. I'm going to introduce Amy Tommaso, and bringing the planning expertise to this community as we think about resilience. And when I asked her for some intro, she shared an interesting, fun fact about Amy, which is super relevant to this. And her photo was once in Rolling Stone magazine for her climate activism work with Fossil Fuel Stanford. So welcome, Amy, and thank you.
So, fossil-free Stanford. Very important difference. So, hi everybody. So I'm Amy Tommaso, community planner at Mad River Valley Planning District, and I'm so happy to see some sunnier skies tonight because if you were at our last climate event, you were here in a torrential downpour, which we did not plan to come as soon as the slide went up that said increased precipitation in Vermont is going to be happening. It was eerie and poignant, and I'm very glad that it's not raining. So last time we gathered to ground ourselves in the facts and the data behind what is actually happening in terms of climate change in Vermont. That was the Vermont Climate Assessment. And it's really important to understand where we are now, to understand where we're going, to have an understanding of the problem, even if it's not always fun, to understand the solution. That solution is the Vermont Climate Action Plan and all the amazing efforts that are going on already in our community to have a more climate resilient and prepared future. So tonight is all about action, and I wanted to start by highlighting one of the action steps and groups that's working really diligently on some of that climate preparedness that we're going to speak more about tonight. So who knows that your town has an energy coordinator? That's amazing. Well, I guess this crowd is probably the ones who would know, but it's true, your town does. So town energy coordinators from Warren, Waitsfield, Fayston, Moortown, and Duxbury have been collaborating since last year on bringing education and resources. And I do want to just acknowledge who those people are so you can find them and ask more tonight or later. So we have Dara Torrey from Moortown, who is here, Chris Badger and Joel Rhodes from Waitsfield. Joel is here as well. Brad Long from Fayston, and Lexi Leacock from Warren. So some of the things that the energy coordinators have done in the past year was working with Efficiency Vermont, Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, and the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, as well as the Planning District, to develop a valley-wide survey about home energy use and equipment. They worked to bring a window dressers weatherization campaign to the valley, which actually resulted in 71 low-cost window inserts being built. And they produced a live workshop featuring a local weatherization contractor and Efficiency Vermont, speaking about home weatherization and cleaner heating solutions. And that's just some of the amazing work that our town energy coordinators are doing. So to learn more, you can sign up at a table way in the back on my left-hand side with your email, and they'll be reaching out to you, but also Dara's here and Joel is here, and so please find them later. They'll be happy to share more local actions. So, thanks for your hard work. So as the community planner for the Mad River Valley's Tri-Town planning entity, I think a lot about climate change, and it's actually, climate planning is really an ethos behind a lot of our work. So I think about how systems are interconnected. For example, how can a more walkable, bikeable village lead to climate resilience? Or how can bolstering our four-season recreation economy do the same thing? And that's why I'm really excited to be here tonight to introduce our speakers and the Climate Action Plan and Municipal Toolkit, because the action plan speaks to how the state will cut our emissions while investing in our rural communities to adapt to climate change, to build resilience, and enhance the sequestration of our working and natural lands. And the accompanying toolkit provides a framework for growing capacity at the community and the local level. And so we're so lucky tonight to have Jane Lazorchak and Marian Wolz with us two of the contributors to both of those groundbreaking documents. So they'll be sharing about what the Climate Action Plan means, both for Vermont and for our local community of the Mad River Valley, because as I believe, and maybe you do too, the really meaningful change happens at the local level. So, a little bit about our speakers for tonight. So, Jane Lazorchak is the Global Warming Solutions Act Director at the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, where she worked closely with the Vermont Climate Council to stand up Vermont's initial climate action plan beginning last December 1st. She has devoted her public service career to stewardship and conservation planning in Vermont and has worked for the Nature Conservancy and as public lands section chief with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, where she collaborated with landowners, colleagues at the agency, and partner organizations to conserve more than 10,000 acres of land, among other successes. And Jane will soon be transitioning into the role of director at the newly formed Vermont Climate Action Office. Welcome, Jane. And we're also so lucky to have Marian Wolz with us, who is the Global Warming Solutions Act Coordinator with the Agency of Natural Resources, where she worked closely to support the Vermont Climate Council in drafting Vermont's initial climate action plan. She has experience working at the state and community levels in Vermont on a variety of initiatives, including housing affordability, renewable energy planning, green infrastructure, and now implementing climate adaptation and resilience actions. Marian has held roles with Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission and Vermont Emergency Management, and she will soon be transitioning into the role of Resilience and Adaptation Coordinator at the newly formed Climate Action Office with Jane. So please join me in welcoming Jane and Marian to the Mad River Valley tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It feels really like a homecoming, actually, to do my first public talk in person in the town that I live in. So for folks who don't know me, I have lived in Waitsfield for 20 years, and it's my first time, actually, having the opportunity to do one of these talks that I often love to join in at Flatbread. So thank you so much for having me. One of the quirks with the technology tonight is that I don't have a clicker for my presentation, so I'm going to try and move down and manage both talking and clicking slides. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to introduce you all to the Climate Action Plan. In warming up and talking with Amy and Corey and Ira ahead of this, there was really an introduction to try to tailor this and scale this down to what it means for the Mad River Valley. The plan is a framework. It's a roadmap that really tries to address implementation at every scale in the state of Vermont. What I'm going to try to do is lay the foundation for what that looks like for all of you, and then hopefully we'll have ample time to really get into a dialogue, which I know all of you are here to ask questions and engage with us around, and try to really bring it down to a level that really is relatable for all of you. So it's apropos that we are here after. I know Stephen and Heather and others were here to talk with you about the climate assessment, and we were really fortunate that the climate assessment was renewing and redoing the data and analysis that it had done 10 years previously. At the same time, we were developing this first climate action plan for the state. The data is clear, it's compelling. I encourage folks to visit the climate assessment website as well as our climatechange.vermont.gov website that links you through all of that and speaks to the way it relates to the national climate assessment. But it's compelling and it's clear that things are changing and that the time to respond is now. So I think that most of us can feel it and understand it, but the time is really most relevant in the winter, where winters are getting shorter, arriving later, leaving sooner. The temperature, I feel like I can't talk and spin. All right, hold on. And then precipitation events are really changing in the state. I love that analogy that Amy related to for the last talk that was here about the rain as it came barreling down, and the slide spoke to it. But this summer, it also means droughts. It also means precipitation coming in more intense and erratic events. And it really makes us think about how people are going to be impacted and affected by this. And as we walk through the Climate Action Plan, and as we talked through how we talked about this and spoke to this, we really tried to focus and center the recommendations in the plan on the fact that not everyone is impacted equally, and how can we think about the distribution of benefits from this plan that we expect, and how can we think about where we direct resources to those who are most impacted by the changes that we're seeing in Vermont. So just to ground us in a little bit of the foundation for why this work is happening and what is guiding the state in this endeavor, Vermont had goals on the books for more than 2 decades around emissions reductions. We were not making the progress that we needed to make based on goals alone. There was a big push to enact a law, and we are one of a handful of states that have something this strong and this powerful as the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's really a climate change action law that speaks to not only the emissions reductions that we know we need to make to slow down the impacts of climate change, but also how we invest and build resilient communities, adapt to climate change, as well as invest in our sequestration and storage of our natural and working lands. The law has been in place for almost 2 years this September. As we walk through this presentation, I'll sort of orient you to some of the details around that law, but it's really powerful. It's not an executive order like some states have. It is here to stay, an act of overcoming the law. So every incremental progress we are making is forward in Vermont. And I really say that because it feels very compelling. Sometimes it doesn't feel like we're doing enough, acting fast enough. But in Vermont, we have this power of this law behind us that's driving the change and the systems thinking that we're doing at the state to power us forward. It set up the Vermont Climate Council. It is a governmental body, well, a non-governmental body, I should say, that is comprised of 15 appointments from the legislature, folks from the Senate and House that speak to the different sectors impacted by climate change, renewable energy, agriculture, forests, and environmental advocates, and more. And then is also comprised of 8 administration officials who sit at the helm of all the state government and governmental agencies that direct the resources that implement climate solutions. So our Agency of Natural Resources, Agency of Transportation, Agency of Agriculture. So it really forced a cross-collaboration conversation of volunteers, local citizens who were appointed by the legislature, as well as state government. And that body functioned in the public eye. We had every meeting with public input, public comment. It was really sort of a transformative process for government to be trying to stand up a plan on a very short timeline while engaging and co-creating with the public. I really loved hearing Amy used that word, but it really is what we're trying to do, because the systems change that we need to address climate change is not only coming from the top, it must be with all of us on board to actually enact these compelling solutions and actions. The plan, we had less than 13 months to stand up the plan. The plan had to be adopted by December 1st of last year. If it was not adopted, the council would have ceased to exist, and the state would have had to go into a regulatory response, which wouldn't have been equitable or fair in any way. The plan put forward a more incentive-based, solution-based approach, and on an extremely tight timeline, 13 months to not only speak to the what we need to do, but the actual implementation steps to get us there. The plan is the initial plan, we say often, because we know we didn't get to everything. The plan has to be adopted and renewed within every 4 years, therefore going forward, and will help drive change on the ground, but also speak to how we work cooperatively with the folks that are part of the solution, part of the process through the council, as well as the subcommittees, which I'll drive in a little deeper in a second. So the council was this 23-member body. There were state staff supporting the process all along the way. But really what was sort of new and exciting about this process was the standing up of subcommittees. These subcommittees are really where the technical expertise, the locals, citizens got involved. People from all across the state came together to represent these different sectors that brought together the recommendations in the Climate Action Plan. 4 of the subcommittees were recognized in the law itself and have permanence and standing obligations long-term with respect to climate action in Vermont. The Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee that thought a lot about the role of natural and working lands, both in the resilience space as well as how we can foster and address further sequestration and storage. Rural Resilience and Adaptation, which thought a lot about the built environment and how to invest in our communities. Cross-sector mitigation, which really put together the recommendations to drive down our emissions. Science and data, which was the underpinning of the science that was needed to inform all of the work. And then the Just Transition Subcommittee, which I'll speak to more in a second, but also was really about overarching the guiding principles and the implementation of how to make all of the recommendations equitable and put forward a lens that really thought about how to engage with Vermonters long-term in this work. So before we even started to sort of formulate recommendations and actions, we were thinking a lot about these principles and working really closely with the Just Transition Subcommittee and the public to engage around what the framework would look like. We wanted to make sure that we didn't build actions and recommendations on top of inequitable principles, state government programs, and really reframe how we do business in Vermont. It was really challenged, I'll say, by the tight timeline. Things that build relationships and work closely with Vermonters take time. And we had only a year during the height of COVID to put together this first plan, which is why we continually call it an initial plan to foster the work that we still need to do with Vermonters to lift up their concerns and interests into the plan and into the specific recommendations and implementation of the actions in the plan. So the guiding principles for a just transition speak to, 1, how we ensure inclusive, transparent, and innovative engagement. We're thinking constantly about not how we speak to Vermonters, but how we listen to Vermonters and demonstrate that we're responding and hearing input in a timely fashion. We're thinking about how the recommendations in the plan create and account restorative recommendations, how we build trust and build within the communities that need our attention. Moving at the speed of trust, so working slowly and listening to people where they are. Prioritizing the most impacted first, creating inclusionary spaces, and all of the recommendations as the law is are really centered on how we support workers, families, and communities through what we know will be a transition as we decarbonize the state and move off fossil fuels. So the goals that had been on the book for Vermont and really the sort of statutory regulatory hook that is in the Global Warming Solutions Act speak to the emissions reductions and the 3 years that sort of are the targets that we have. These were the goals that we were not, you can see up in the non-shaded side, the left side of the graph, Vermont was sort of jumping up and down annually on how much emissions. We were on a slow trajectory going down just by market pressures, people investing in EVs, the limited amount of weatherization we were doing as a state, new net zero homes. However, in order to drive the reductions that are now required by law, it will really take transformative measures in the state. So the first emissions reductions requirement is coming in 2025. We're required to be 26% below our 2005 emission levels. That was actually our peak year for emissions. So we pretty much are on track to hit that emissions reductions without not much intervention. But the next one, and not all states have these sort of intermediate years that drive to ensure the long-term goal is met. But in 2030, we're required to be more than 40% below 1990 levels, or essentially cutting our emissions in half. So it's a much steeper trajectory. It's in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. It's generally in line with Biden's goals, the president's goals right now, and will require significant investments in cutting pollution through different actions that we have lined up in the plan. The law, as I mentioned, is really comprehensive, but there is sort of a bifurcated approach the way we're looking at climate action, and there's a lot of push to rethink about how we do this. We know that if we cut our emissions, even at the requirements that are put forward in the law, the climate is still changing. We still have to think about how we build resilience, how we adapt, and also think about all the co-benefits that our natural and working lands play. But however, the law, there's this regulatory hook that allows anybody to sue the Agency of Natural Resources if you don't hit your emissions reductions. But we're not quite there yet on what the metrics are, the targets for what we're thinking about with resilience and adaptation and how we sequester and store carbon. So we're thinking a lot about that as we think about what implementation looks like going forward and how we build concrete targets and metrics, because we know that climate action is a three-legged stool and that we need to be investing in all of these to have comprehensive climate action at the state level. So what's in the plan? The plan is a huge document. I like to joke that only a handful of us have read it from front to back. It has the high level, what we call pathways in the plan, 64 pathways of the what is needed to address climate action. And then it gets all the way down to more than 230 operational tasks that are infused across all level of state government and down to local citizens and the role that we all have to play with climate action. It's bucketed in 5 impact areas. So all of the work of those subcommittees and ultimately the council in putting together the plan puts the work and separates the work into these 5 areas, looking at how we cut our climate pollution, how we invest in capturing carbon, so how we invest in our forests, how we rethink agriculture and the role that it has to play in storing carbon, how we build resilience in our natural and working lands, how we lift up our communities and make them vital and resilient going forward. And then we thought a lot about where are the leverage points that we can hit that actually get us action across all of these areas. Things like compact settlement that help us invest in resilient forests and natural and working lands outside of our compact areas, but also help us reduce our vehicle miles traveled overall and cut our climate pollution. So there's all of the actions in the plan are really comprehensive and hit across all of these areas. And as I was trying to think about what would be most relevant to the Mad River Valley, I was trying to think about how to frame an eye and looking at the plan and thinking about how we all have a role to play in the influence in this area. All of the recommendations in the plan speak to scalability. So there is a role for us to play to appreciate that the change that we need to see at the landscape level takes systems change. It takes change at the top level. It takes laws to be passed. It takes the legislature acting. It takes the governor setting priorities with federal funding and more to instill the change at a high level. But it takes state leadership to realign and think about how we coordinate and lift this up and work closely through organizations like the Friends of Mad River, municipalities to reach those programs and get them on the ground to landowners and make sure that that cycle is working across both ways. So what I thought I would do before I turned it over to Marian to really think about implementation and access and capacity is just illustrate a few of those recommendations and ideas that come forward in the Climate Action Plan and how they work at each varying level of government. So weatherization, buildings and thermal, if you hearken back to that graph that showed you where our emissions come from, transportation in a rural state is by far the hardest nut to crack. We all drive cars, we all move around. It's a hard system to break. And we're thinking a lot at a systems level about what transportation can look like in a changing world. But buildings and thermal in Vermont is actually pretty much just as close. The way we heat our homes, the way we build our homes uses a ton of carbon pollution right now. And so we've been thinking not only about how we invest in cleaner energy for our homes, but also thinking about weatherization and how we scale up a program that has been sort of in fits and starts really for the last decade. The last 10 years or so, we've weatherized just over 30,000 homes in Vermont. The policy and the targets in our climate action plan speak to 90,000 additional homes by 2030 to get the climate pollution cuts that we need in order to meet the targets. That's a scale at which is hard to sort of comprehend at times. And so we're thinking a lot about systems in all ways to sort of influence how we affect weatherization and how we start to scale up, but don't lose the momentum as funding sources shift, because that's where it's been in Vermont. We get influxes of money, people start to weatherize, workforce gets there, and then the money cuts off. So we're thinking a lot about weatherization at scale, and there's been a big momentum at the legislature to think about how we fund that long term. We have sort of short-term capacity through federal funding, of which we've put as much as we can into weatherization, but we need a long-term funding source for weatherization. Weatherization has the benefit of cutting climate pollution, investing in public health, healthy homes, and thinking about how we distribute that across the state. We've invested with those federal dollars in weatherization assistance programs. The program at OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, provides an immense resource to people across the state to think about at the state level how we are providing the systems needed to think about workforce development as well as grants for low-income Vermonters. And this year, actually, transitioning those grants to not only low-income Vermonters, but also how we can reach moderate-income Vermonters who don't often have the capital investment needed to invest in weatherization. At the RPC level, we have a recommendation to think about how we staff up weatherization navigators. So people who can come to your home and not only think about weatherization, but do healthy home assessments, come to your house, think about not only if you're weatherizing, but how you fuel switch at the same time. Think about a whole home assessment to actually think about how we decarbonize even further. And then homeowners just have this crucial role in actually fitting the cycle and how we provide the outreach to everyone. So weatherization is only going to work if we scale it up at every level in the state going forward. And finally, my sort of other observation and thinking about how we can influence at every scale is thinking about how we do climate resilience and how we think about climate resilience planning. The Climate Action Plan has a ton of recommendations around resilience and around resilient infrastructure, around natural and working lands, and it thinks at a whole scale approach to how we're going to address this. So at the state level, we've been funding hazard mitigation buyouts and providing state match. That's a federal program through FEMA where you can actually relocate infrastructure that's continually getting hit. We've never had a dedicated state match for that in Vermont, so it's been hard at times to apply federal dollars on the ground to buyouts and think about where we remove flood-prone infrastructure, but that's something that we are funding now in Vermont and thinking about a long-term funding source for. At the Climate Office, going forward, one of the leftover sort of final recommendations in the Global Warming Solutions Act that we're moving forward with is the development of a municipal vulnerability index. So we're working to contract out a GIS mapping tool that looks at socioeconomic factors as well as climate indicators to think about where are our most vulnerable areas in communities so that town planners, so state officials can target the resources at the most appropriate spots within towns. We don't have all of that data in one place right now, and then we're thinking about how we can make that accessible for people through one place. And there's recommendations as well throughout the plan around how towns can do climate readiness assessments for infrastructure and integrate using EPA tools, thinking across disciplines and across geographies to actually plan for climate-ready infrastructure in your communities and provide resources, and think about how we scale communities to actually do what Friends of Mad River helps assist all of you to do, as well as the planning district, and how we bring that model to other towns in the state. And finally, there are a ton of actions in the plan also that speak to individual landowners and the role that you can play on your own properties in individual management choices you can make to reduce stormwater and runoff, as well as erosion on your property. So we're hopeful that the plan, which is really trying to address things across disciplines and across levels of government, is trying to reach and target how we bring these actions to different levels and target the audience that we're speaking to. In our role going forward, Marian and I, and Marian's going to talk to you about additional capacity that the Climate Office is trying to target specifically at municipalities like the Mad River Valley and beyond in Vermont. We really, at the agency, never thought, hadn't had a coordinated approach to how we were thinking about climate action, both within our agency and then across the agencies of state government that have a role in climate solutions. And so one of the recommendations that came out of the climate plan was the formation of a climate office that thinks about how we track and measure progress around climate action in the state, how it thinks about how we support the ongoing work of a climate action plan and future iterations of the plan, and then also thinks about how we engage long-term with Vermonters around the development of future iterations of the plan and implementation of specific actions so that they're fair and equitable and reaching as many people as we can. So the Climate Office is just getting going. We literally were just put in the budget for July of this year. We're reforming and thinking about how we coordinate across all areas of government and work closely with the administration and the legislature to further climate solutions from the plan. And one of the most exciting things from the climate plan and the role of the Climate Office will be about how we bring tools and resources and additional capacity to all of you to further climate action in your own town plans, at your own homes, and in your own communities. And Marian, through her work as a Resilience and Adaptation Coordinator, is leading the charge of developing the Climate Toolkit that we're calling, and would like to share that with all of you before we sort of shift to a dialogue about questions.
Well, thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening. Hope Jane got your brains moving a little bit so we can have a discussion around a climate toolkit and then hear your fantastic questions once we're done there. So I'm here to speak to you today about work that we're doing to expand access to programs, resources, technical assistance at the state level to you all as municipal actors at a local level. I'll start out by saying that our work that we're doing within the newly formed Climate Office and with stakeholders from across the Climate Council is just in the beginning stages of design and development. We're working with a fantastic group of people to think about what would be a really useful way for municipalities to connect on climate action across all of the day-to-day work you all do in municipal planning and implementation. But we're very much in the beginning stages of this. So I'm here with you all today to give you an overview of what we're thinking in terms of building a climate toolkit, how that may work in terms of your day-to-day work at a municipal level, and then hopefully hear from you all about what you may like to see in the toolkit, what perhaps we're missing in terms of our design and build, and how that can help further build capacity in your communities moving forward. So in the Global Warming Solutions Act, there is language that describes the need to recommend tools for municipalities to assess their climate emergency preparedness, evaluate their financial capacity to address infrastructure resilience, and prioritize investment in that infrastructure. So there's language in that law that Jane talked about that established the Climate Council and requires the writing of the Climate Action Plan to actually recommend tools for municipalities to help build capacity to address climate change. That specific recommendation was built into the Climate Action Plan through the hard work of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, who's really charged with thinking about how do we build and address capacity issues to think about climate change at a rural and small-scale level with local governments.
The Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee really wanted to broaden the approach and think about how do we create a toolkit that not only thinks about infrastructure investment and financial capacity, but also thinks about public health and how communities can better access and communicate with their vulnerable populations. How do we think about those long-term creeping hazards such as drought and other invasive species and tick-borne illnesses, and how we communicate that to our communities? So really taking a broad approach to thinking about climate change and climate action through the lens of municipal action was really built into the development of the Climate Action Plan, and as a result is work that we're doing now to build out a climate toolkit. So as I said, we have a really wonderful group of folks that are working to really think through, work with stakeholders, convene focus groups, and look at previous work on municipal action and climate change. This group of folks is made up of representation from 4 of the 5 subcommittees of the Vermont Climate Council, to include representation from Just Transitions, the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, Rural Resilience and Adaptation, and our Science and Data Subcommittee. These include folks such as our state climatologist, a couple representatives from local governments around the state, a few regional planning commission staff, and folks from around state government as well who work on climate change issues day to day. We're convening as a group regularly to start thinking about how do we build a set of resources that connects work across state government to make it easy for municipalities to use as you start to think about climate action planning and work that you're doing at a day-to-day level and how that connects to climate change. This task group, as we're calling it, has identified 3 key priorities to ensure this toolkit is usable and really user-friendly for folks for the primary audience. The first is that it be simple, and that's a really loaded term, especially when we're trying to communicate access to tools and technical assistance from across state government. But hoping that we can have a set of resources in a toolkit in an online format that allows municipalities to understand where their day-to-day work on their roads and filling potholes, their work on building housing and economic development, all has a connection to climate action, and ensuring that's also not duplicating or making work harder for folks who are volunteering or working at a municipal level. The second priority is that it highlights existing work across state government. We have fantastic partners, for example, at the Agency of Transportation, who do work for pre-disaster and post-disaster response. There are resilience planning tools at the Agency of Transportation and damage assessment tools that they already have existing that municipalities can use for transportation resilience planning with a climate change lens. At the Department of Health, there's a climate and health program, which really helps communities think about how do we prepare for hot weather events, how do we think about establishing cooling shelters for our vulnerable populations, and they're doing fantastic work with that lens. There are folks at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development who are working on a newly established multifamily housing unit electric vehicle grant program that was just launched a few weeks ago. They also provide grants regularly after disasters to help communities rebuild more walkable neighborhoods. So I provide all of those examples to say that there's really fantastic work happening across state government and outside with partners such as the Friends of the Mad and the Planning District on climate change action. And the hope is that this toolkit will help pull those resources together into one place for folks to see what's out there, what programs, technical assistance providers, and financial resources are available for us to use at a community level. And then the last priority is that we really help highlight climate change impacts and issues through the use of this toolkit. I think we all know that there's a lot of communities out there that are starting to think about climate change action, how those impacts are affecting their homeowners and their renters and the use of their transportation networks. But there are some communities where that's just on the back burner for them. And so we're really trying to highlight how do we pull in climate change issues and impacts and create a space for that to be built into the municipal planning lexicon for folks across the state. So in thinking about the collection of tools and resources we want to share in this toolkit, and understanding that there may be a couple of different users and primary audience members who want to access resources in this toolkit, we've started by thinking about what are those broad topic areas that can be used to group tools and resources with a lens of climate change. We've come up with 5 topic areas that you can see on the screen here: people and communities, climate justice and equity, farms and food, natural environment, and built environment, and have come up with these topic areas through a focus group we've held with municipalities and regional planning commissions, and communication with our partners across state government. We plan to continue to have focus groups, and so we'll continue to refine these topic areas, but hope it really provides a good lens for thinking about how do we actually connect thinking about climate impacts and hazards and those day-to-day issues that municipalities are facing in their planning and implementation actions. Within these 5 topic areas, there are subtopics that get into more detail about some of the specific climate action areas that folks may be wanting to do work. Under people and communities, we'll highlight things like emergency preparedness and a disaster response, highlight housing and transportation systems under the built environment. Under the natural environment, we'll be highlighting wetlands, trees and forests, your water resources, and your riverine corridors. Under farms and food, we'll be highlighting both our food systems and agriculture. And then climate justice and equity will be really providing a lot of educational tools for municipalities to use when thinking about how does climate justice and equity intersect in all of your work. I will say one of the interesting things, as I said, we hosted a focus group with primary audience members for the toolkit, municipal leaders, and regional planning commissions. And some of the key takeaways we heard from them were that they were really interested in getting more involved in climate justice and equity work at a local level, understanding where their vulnerable populations might be, how to actually communicate and talk to folks about what it means to have a more just and equitable climate future, but they didn't know where to start. So we really identified that this needed to be highlighted as a primary category within the toolkit to share resources with municipalities around how to do that work at a local level. Another way we're thinking about how to highlight tools in the toolkit, and I'm sharing this to say that there are going to be multiple sort of points of entry for this toolkit, understanding that there are a lot of resources out there and a lot of ways that climate intersects with our community work. So either through selecting your climate action areas from that previous slide, or coming at it from a place of understanding we're a community, we're a municipality that just needs to do some more learning around climate impacts, climate change in our community, and how that's impacting our populations and our infrastructure and our municipal actions. So we are thinking of having tools also filtered by a learn, act, implement set of criteria. For learning, it may be highlighting something like the Rivers and Roads training program held with the Agency of Natural Resources and Agency of Transportation, or some guides from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development about how to build and understand why walkable, complete streets development is good has co-benefits for climate change and public health. Perhaps there are communities out there, such as folks, as you all involved in the Mad River Valley, who are starting to act, who are starting to plan for and think about how does climate change impact your communities and what actions may you want to take at a local level. Under ACT, we'll highlight sample actions from across municipal governments who are thinking about climate change. We'll be sharing resources around zoning for complete streets neighborhoods, or how you could get more involved and think about electric vehicle and electrification at a local level. And then there are communities that have climate action plans that have done that work and are ready to actually implement their actions. Under implement, we'll highlight a lot of the financial resources that are available for folks, grants and other incentive opportunities from across state government and our other partners, as well as sample actions that you can take and sort of start on the ground as you want to tackle climate change at a local and a regional level. So all of that is to say, what we're really getting to, understanding that we want it to be simple, highlight climate impacts, and really connect existing tools and resources across the state, is a toolkit or a toolbox, a set of resources that you can use at the local level to help do your municipal climate planning. Whether that looks something like this, we've been working with some fantastic IT folks who have been helping us visualize how this might look. There will be a set of resources that will have multiple filters for you all, depending on how you're coming at it and what issue you may be focused on. So highlighting that climate action area, whether it's transportation, people and communities, food systems, and agriculture, highlighting whether that's a tool that's focused on learning, acting, or implementing at a local level, and also highlighting that there will be different types of tools, tools that help you in your planning efforts, tools that actually connect you with data that's available through the Vermont State Climatologist, climate data and trends, financial resources, lists of grants that are available to you all broken into different categories, education and outreach tools that you can use with your neighbors, that you can use at the municipal level or use at a regional level, and case studies, so you can learn what folks around the state are doing to tackle climate change. And then the last, and maybe one of the most important pieces, is on my next slide. is that one of the many things we've heard, both from municipalities, from regional planning commissions, from our state technical assistance partners, is that it's going to be really important to have a place in the toolkit to allow municipalities to talk to someone, to connect with someone, to talk about climate change, talk about the issues you're facing. We're having issues with erosion or washout in these areas. We're really concerned about conserving this particular piece of land. We're seeing issues with wells and drought in our communities, and we're not sure what to do. I'm going to paraphrase something that a colleague said in a meeting last week. He said, we're in a climate emergency. And when you're in an emergency for a health reason, you dial 911. You don't go looking in your toolbox. And so in many cases, it may be needed that you just want someone to call and talk to. That is possible. It's very possible that's a role for Jane and I and others in the climate office, but there are folks from across state government and elsewhere who can help connect you with resources, talk you through what your issue might be, and help you think about planning and implementation actions. So that's going to be a very key feature of this toolkit, and will be highlighted as a way for you all to understand the connections between state programs and how they impact climate change work. And then the last thing I'll highlight is, for some folks, and sometimes for me as well, I just don't know where to start. There's a lot out there. It sometimes can feel overwhelming when you think about climate action. You don't know where to start as a community. So we're thinking a lot about how do we create a sort of checklist or a guide of a step-by-step process that folks can look at and say, here's the specific issue I'm thinking about. Here's the objective we're trying to achieve. What are the 3 things that I need to know? Who are the resources? Who has the resources that I can use? What's the data that's available to me, and who can I talk to? So having a very basic place, understanding where should I start, will be front and center on this toolkit as well. So I'll wrap up with all that to say this is work that's happening with us in the State Climate Action Office, really trying to think about how do we best categorize and pull together work across the state on climate action into one place to make it easier for you all as you do action at the local level to tackle climate change. I think I'm going to hand it over to Jane to moderate for questions. You're welcome to ask questions or provide feedback on the toolkit, on anything Jane presented, and then Amy and Corey are available to answer questions as well, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. And I'll pull up the last.
Okay, I think Rebecca's here to help us with moving mics around, but anybody can feel free to raise a hand or jump up with a question or comment, and there's a whole crew of us here to try to answer them, so I encourage you. Jane. Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me back there. I think this is great, what you're doing. I don't mind, but yeah, for the people in the back. I think it's incredible what you're doing, and I guess our tax dollars are paying for that too, which is awesome. That's why Vermont is cool. But this is, to me, all what they call palliative. Like, it's like a Band-Aid. Like, I want to do all of that, but I want to pay it forward, because this is dealing with, like, what's happening, but I want to stop it from happening. So I'd love to hear from your office, from the state, and from anyone else in the room, how can we all be more proactive in our state to be at the state and even federal level to fight?
Well, great comment. It does.
Sorry, it's kind of a tough one.
Yeah, no. I will say that what this process has shown me is the shift in the culture of what good governance and process looks like, and it starts with citizens being involved and engaged. It's not about government coming up with solutions anymore on our own and putting it out there. It is like the process, the term co-creation is one that we're all trying to understand what that means going forward. The council process, all of that is public and open. We have public comment periods, and think about how we engage and respond to Vermonters throughout the meetings in an authentic way, so that it's not just comments that aren't responded to, it's really interactive. And that's been really different. It's both challenging, because it feels like, as a state official, where it's a climate emergency and you're trying to act, but you're trying to bring people along with you. It's hard, but it's really been rewarding for all of us. And I will say that beyond this, the legislature is an open process. What did and didn't get through the legislature last year was because of the public citizens. There were big climate bills that failed last year because of public perception around what they were or weren't doing. And there were climate bills that passed because the public wanted them. So I think that I encourage folks to get involved. I had the privilege of being in DC last week thinking about transportation solutions, and the people who spoke were lifelong governmental officials who said they've never seen action that's happening now at both the federal level and at state level. So it's an exciting time. Is it enough? Is it too little, too late? We'll see. So.
Let's encourage everyone to be involved.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
I'm not excoriating, let's go.
That's great.
So I actually want to pitch in with some local solutions. Jumping off the transportation segue is really perfect. So at the Planning District, we have a Transportation Advisory Committee for which we're actually seeking new membership for a number of new initiatives, so including a campaign to get out a lot of incentives for e-bikes, for electric cars. We're going to be doing a walk audit this fall in which we inventory walkability and bikeability of our village cores, so that would be Irisville and Warren. And so with that data then coming back to our municipal bodies and saying, hey, like, people want to walk and bike here, but this intersection specifically is not crossable, or this sidewalk doesn't accommodate pedestrians with a stroller, for example, or a wheelchair. And so getting those very specific improvements for how to then go and equip our committee members and our citizens with the tools to then go and advocate for those changes. And I will say that as we know and we saw, transportation in a rural state is the #1 emissions causing sector, and so really getting behind our local, more sustainable, human-powered transportation alternatives is key to shifting that, and that's going to be a group effort because we're only going to be as bikeable and as walkable as, one, the infrastructure allows us to be, and two, as many people do that and start to make those important shifts towards becoming a bike-friendly, ped-friendly community. So if you're interested in some of those initiatives, please get in touch with me or go to our mrvpd.org Planning District website, and I'd be happy to fill you in on more of those. Yeah.
I don't know if I need that. Do I need it? Sure, yeah. You do? Oh, hello? I've never used one of these before. What about public transportation? I mean, there are a lot of old people in Vermont, I'm being one of them, and I think something 20% now, 25%, they can't bike or walk long distances. And we live in a sea of cars, as far as I can make out. And I think we desperately need public transportation. I just wondered if you've got any money for that, you've got any plans for that, you're going to do anything about it. Thanks.
Oh, perfect. So as for public transportation, as you know, we have half the year, actually less than half, our seasonal bus service to Sugarbush. Now, I know that is not the answer you're looking for. However, I say that because it shows that it's possible here and it's a model for expanded bus service. So the Planning District and our Transportation Advisory Committee this year started talks with Green Mountain Transit about how to expand that bus service to a year-round service, which, as these things do take time, will involve a feasibility study and a demand study of how many people would actually take the bus, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really important that we have this strong local data and demand for that bus. And so, again, getting in touch with Green Mountain Transit, with the Planning District, would be two ways to start to aggregate that loud, request and actually need for a year-round bus service here in the Valley.
I will just say, at the state level, there's, as I alluded to, there's a lot of federal funding right now going into transportation through many bills and laws that are being passed. And there are a number of pilots around the state looking at microtransit and the feasibility of smaller transit opportunities that are public. Montpelier has an exceptional one that's happening right now, looking at how we can be more flexible in route planning and route demand. And those are kinds of some of the models that we're thinking about how to extrapolate across the state. But the solutions in the plan speak to how to invest in public transit, how to reduce vehicle miles traveled, to create a new transition of transportation system that goes beyond just electrification, which we know we have to do also. Alice, did you have a question?
Oh, I'd like to add to a couple of things that you said.
Sure.
I'm just going to add a couple of things that you should all know about for some of these issues. One is that Waitsfield is currently working with a grant that we got from the Department of Housing and DHCD, and Housing and Community Development. We got a grant to look at our zoning bylaws in the Irisville and village areas. The purpose of it, one, is to look at growth and any available housing we can do there. Also, it's designed to make, especially the Irisville area, more walkable. So Waitsfield has already started on that kind of project to make our sidewalks and shopping areas a more walkable, kind of even a more pleasant place that you might want to visit. The other thing is, with our winter bus, the Sugar Bush bus, there is a service that's called the Valley Floor Service, which services Irisville out to Old County Road in that area. And what I found interesting this year is in ridership, Green Mountain Transit said if there was a growth in ridership, it was on that Valley Floor route, which is really kind of cool. That would be people going back and forth to work in Irisville, things like that. So I just kind of wanted to add that to the mix of things that are already going on. I think if you ask around, you're going to find that there's a lot of things already happening that, if you think about them, we are doing things that are going to address climate change. We just kind of have to know them and circle them all together so we know what's going on.
Thanks, Alice.
Oh, there you go.
Hi. I'm concerned about the weatherization issues, and I had an experience earlier this summer with trying to navigate the system to help somebody in the Northeast Kingdom get both a consultant, a plan, and also construction workers to help with that. And there were multiple high barriers which we were unable to negotiate successfully. And one of them was certainly that there are not enough consultants and there weren't enough laborers to do the work up there. No one was available for 6 to 12 months. And I'm wondering if there's something being done to increase the labor force and the skills in that area. And I know the legislature did pass legislation to increase the labor force in several different significant areas, healthcare being one I'm very familiar with. But I wondered if you were getting any help in that direction and what you saw that might facilitate this, because it's so important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question and comment. Yeah, the Weatherization Assistance Program, and Sarah Phillips, who's the Director of Economic Opportunity for the state of Vermont with the Department of Children's and Families, that's actually where that Weatherization Assistance Program lives for the state. She's worked with some other organizations, including the Public Service Department, as well as got funding through a pitch study through the Energy Action Network to look at what the barriers are that you're speaking to for workforce and beyond. And they have a large grant out to consider a technical unit at VTC specific to workforce development and bringing on laborers. The challenge in the past has been the fits and starts of money in the state, where we've made investments for a year, for 2 years in weatherization, and then the money goes away. And so there's been a challenge to sort of build up or commit to moving into that field. When the money dries up, the work tends to dry up. So the interest has been to think about how we build capacity through our tech centers, build workforce by also demonstrating a commitment to long-term funding for weatherization. The Clean Heat Standard, which failed in the legislature to pass, was one mechanism that was going to look at how to develop credits and funding for weatherization. It was not the be-all, end-all for permanent funding for weatherization, but it was one option. And there's further analysis and work going on to think about long-term funding. Pretty much the federal funding will dry up in 2026. So the clock's sort of ticking to continue to ensure that we have that capacity built up. But yeah, I've heard that a lot about weatherization. Karen.
Hey, Jane. Excuse me. So this is a question about actions at the individual level and the planning process you're using to try to motivate people to change behavior. And I know Efficiency Vermont is like, what, the gold standard. They just know how to do it. They know the phrases. They know how to incentivize just by encouraging people. So how are you guys, for other areas, are you also using sort of the social marketing concept? I was thinking of your question about how do you help people who don't have cars or can't drive get places, because it's hard. But so what if you had a campaign that was take your neighbor to the market? Where, especially out in this area, right, where if you're going to the grocery store, you might just call the neighbor down the road and say, I'm going shopping, you want to come with me? And that could be a whole campaign to sort of address that issue. It maybe not be the perfect one, but there could be a marketing campaign around that. Is that enough information that you can reply, or am I just rambling?
Well, it's really interesting, and there are a lot of other people who work in this field in this room, and in fact, I had a joy and privilege of going out with Laura, who works at the Council on Rural Development, on Friday afternoon last week, and we talked a lot about systems change and about the different layers of how we at state government work, how nonprofits worked, and how you all reach the whole system to drive change. At the Climate Office, we're thinking a lot about how we re-envision how we work with Vermonters long term, and instead of communications and marketing only, we're thinking about what that looks like from engagement and how we actually go out intentionally and often with Vermonters to involve them in the process. And so right now we have a new position in the Climate Office that will be posted any day for Community Engagement and Communications Coordinator. In that way, thinking about how we talk about strategies and actions and engage people. I will say that just ironically, it's, when we go and talk to people, we really want to talk to them about systems change. And most people in Vermont just want to know what they can do, right? And how they can help influence change. And it's throughout the whole process of developing the plan, there was this tension around putting too much burden on personal action versus systems change, because in order to meet the lofty requirements of the law, objectives where we know as a culture we want to shift to, it's going to take whole systems change to decarbonize the way we need to. But personal action has a role in that, and there is a whole section in the plan that speaks to the roles and responsibilities we as individuals and community members have to play. But it's just a funny tension, because I think people think for too long if you recycle or if I make this choice. But this is going to really be all levels of government and all levels of people making the change and initiative. But thinking about how we engage at every level will make it successful. So.
Well, I had thought, coincide with what you suggested, you know, neighbor helping neighbor, is we're in an emergency, and I know during World War II in England, they had a whole propaganda education system in the schools. The kids would come home, they'd take black paint and make a ring around the tub saying, save water, we can't have full tubs. They didn't have showers, you know, it was a lot of tubs then. And when we had all the evidence about how bad smoking was, again, it was the kids talking to their parents, saying, you gotta quit smoking. They have a big influence. They shame adults. And you could use the educational system to get the kids on board with getting their parents to carpool, getting their parents to ask a neighbor to shop, doing more about recycling, whatever. But the kids really have a big influence, and it's their future. So I think if you speak to the educators about, you know, making it work.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also want to let Marian and others talk, but we have a whole section in the plan about education and thinking about how we operationalize the language choices we use in government, the language choices, and how we engage with teachers and community members. And it's all there. It's a matter of like how we bring that to people. And I think that what you're witnessing is this shift now for all of us to think about all of these ideas and issues have been brought forward, and now it's how we bring it out and operationalize it. But yes, I believe very much in education. And we were really lucky both on the council to have a council member appointed to represent the youth voice on the council. She held us probably more accountable than anybody on the whole climate council to pushing forward with more comprehensive change and making us feel uncomfortable in our seats than anyone else did. And one of the amazing legacies that she left as she stepped down to go to college this summer was the institutionalizing of a youth member on all 5 of the subcommittees and a youth council member, so that there's a system of support for youth voices in the climate work and the climate action at the state government. So, and VEEP, we have an organization that supports youth lobbyists, youth voice and climate action, is helping support and even get credits, high school credits and college credits for students being able to participate in this work going forward. So it's great to have youth at the table with us thinking about solutions, since they're the ones often holding us accountable to drive change.
One thing I'll add, can you hear me? Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Around educational resources specifically is something that's come up in our conversations around what to include in the toolkit. The state climatologist is also a professor at UVM, and she's done work previously in talking to educators, K-12 educators, around how they incorporate climate change into their curriculums. So we're thinking about how to reconnect that work that she's done either through the toolkit or through her work as the state climatologist, because she has a role through her funding through NOAA and her appointment as the state climatologist to work and provide information to individuals and anyone that has questions around climate change. And so potentially highlighting those educational resources through her webpage, and then highlighting that on the toolkit as well. And I know there are folks from Central Vermont Office of Economic Opportunity and other community action agencies that are interested in understanding what those existing curriculum resources are around climate change. And so we're trying to see how we can elevate those, because there's a lot of work that's been done there already in consolidating those. So hoping that will be a component of it as well.
And certainly all these programs are great and will certainly help us down the road. But I would like to suggest or think of how we can get to a point that we get individuals to change how they're carrying on every day, from not leaving their car idling, or you know, we know about the transportation things, or biking or walking, and that's certainly a problem, but just on how we live every day. And to have maybe a format where in our local papers, or like in the New York Times, for instance, where they have that wire cutter, where they review products, maybe every day or once a week they could have a suggestion on what someone could do. This is how you make this yogurt, or this is how you know, we could all just start looking at how we consume, because yes, we can weatherize our houses. Recycling, we know, is not working. What we need to do is reduce, and we need to teach people how to reduce, the same way the young woman up front mentioned about the war effort. During the war effort here in the States, people all pulled together to even saving cans to build airplanes and stuff. So we can certainly do that again, and that's what I would speak to. You have that one section there where you had the 5 categories. So even like farm and food, about how we can even start to move our food and process our food, because our farmers have to put it in little plastic containers, or it has to be in plastic bags. How we can look at how food is brought to our table and how we buy it and deal with it. That's my spiel. We're bombarded every day with, you know, just how bad it is, but we can all start, if we start to teach people what they can do just in their little daily, everyday life.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important that first and foremost, it's about conservation and consuming less, not shifting the way we live to a different kind of energy use that's cleaner. And that tension is often there in our conversations, yeah.
I'd like to follow up with that. It's not just so much learning. We've already done plenty of teaching. It's time that we all, and we're all guilty of it, we have to reduce, and that was part of it. And part of it also is not to allow our visitors to have some pass. When you mentioned the idling issue, it is phenomenal. I'm someone who's out there all the time. I'm an essential worker type. And I am just flabbergasted to see our visitors come to the state, and we have plenty of in-state people that do it too, idling year-round for their computer offices, in their cars, for their pets. It just goes on and on. It's like, where are you? What planet do you live on? But when it comes to the state, we need to have more of this conversation of how we can reduce. When is it going to come to the point that we all have to go, are we going to burn fossil fuels to get to work, or do we have to give up our recreational fossil fuel burning? Whoa, that's going to be a moment as the permafrost disappears underneath us. When does this moment come when we personally have to decide, oh, I am not going to take that flight to Europe to vacation, or I am not going to be using the Vast Trail this time for the snowmobile. It's all of us, all our recreational activities. When is the party over and we start acting responsible? That's where we're at. Thank you.
I might speak to that for just a second. Okay, can you hear? Yeah. I just speak to a small portion of what you just said to let everyone know, if you haven't seen this in the newspaper or in any of the media, the recent Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative VOREC grant that came to our community for $410,000 did include a portion for the Steward MRV collaborative. So that's a group of people that are working in conservation and recreation that are trying to do some social marketing to help encourage an ethos of stewardship in our community and in our visitors as people come here and experience this place. So we're at the very beginning stages of that, but really trying to think about like how we just encourage that ethos in this community amongst us and amongst the people that come here to really enjoy this place. So thanks.
Jordan.
Thanks. Just a comment really as folks are talking about communication and education. It reminded me of a couple things I heard on the radio this week. I think probably stemmed, I'm sure folks know that in the US House there was the Inflation Reduction Act which passed, which has a most monumental climate change bill that has gone through so far and looks like it's going to be signed into law, fingers crossed. But there was lots of discussion about it on the radio and sort of addressing the psychological impacts of climate change and why we as a country haven't passed something like this before. And 2 points stuck in my mind. One was that climate change, just in terms of being a human being, is not so much a long-term problem anymore, but it's so great in scale and long-term in nature that it's hard for, you know, the idea was that it's really kind of hard to grasp the scale of the problem, and I think contributes more to people just not knowing what to do. Not that they don't care, but just feeling like it's an overwhelming problem. And the other part that I thought was really interesting is reframing the discussion to have more of a personal impact or a shorter term impact to help people realize that there are co-benefits of climate change initiatives. And the way that they kind of articulated this was in the name of the bill itself. It wasn't a climate change bill, it was called the Inflation Reduction Act, and how that, if you put that spin to it, I'll just say, it can reach, that message or that intent can reach folks who may be you know, not necessarily on the bandwagon, but are looking at the legislation and the intent of the law in terms of dealing with a more immediate problem, which is inflation, which is rising costs. So not to call an important issue by another name, but I think there's opportunities in taking the messaging about climate change and explaining that there's co-benefits that benefit people, not just recycling or reducing could be good for simplifying your life. You know, ride sharing is great, a way to be introduced to a community, to meet your neighbors, not just for emissions reductions, but for other benefits as well. And I think that's, you know, as we're thinking about the new language that comes with some of this evolving policy, just thinking about how there are other benefits that kind of permeate at the individual level, I thought was a really interesting way of kind of helping us see this in a different way. So that's my comment.
I just wanted to make two suggestions for the transportation piece that kind of get to a lot of the things that people have said today, pretty concrete things. One is, I think we complicate things sometimes way too much in the United States, and certainly in Vermont with planning, but I work for government, so I'm part of the whole problem. But I've lived in a lot of rural communities in other places where they figure these things out. And we have two good examples here. One of them is the Wheels bus thing. The Wheels bus thing, you freewheel and you get transportation on demand. It's essentially a free Uber, you know, and there are systems like, they're not even systems, there are options like that in a lot of rural places where I've been, where you literally call up, somebody comes, you pay the driver, you get in, boom. You know, and they take you where you need to go, and you're sitting with unknown people, and you just go around and around, and they don't make it really complicated. I tried since early 2000s to work with Green Mountain Transit to try to get some meaningful bus service here. Not gonna happen. As long as they have to prove, it's a chicken and the egg problem, as long as they have to prove that the ridership is there, they will never do it, and the ridership won't be there until we change people's habits. And part of how we change people's habits is, this is the second thing I was gonna suggest, is that we have to subsidize for a while an profitable or and doesn't even make it break even system that just goes all around, not just the valley floor, but I'm talking Waterbury, Burlington, Montpelier, the valley, places where people get in the habit, or it's going to take a number of years, where they get in the habit of going down, waiting 10 minutes, getting on a bus, going to where they need to go, maybe switching to another one. People in the US, and particularly in rural areas like Vermont, are not used to that. As long as it costs money and the system comes maybe once an hour, if you're lucky, and it comes to a place where you have to bring your car to get there and all the things that the current system does, no one will ever use it. So we have to be willing to change people's behavior by introducing, in a sense, an incentive system which is going to be non-profitable or cost us something until people get used to using it over a period of time and find that, guess what, it actually works. You know, it's actually easy. Like, I don't have to stand forever at a stop in the middle of winter. I don't have to walk a mile to get to it. I can get where I need to go. I don't wait more than 20, 30 minutes to get there. I was just in Europe this summer, in Scotland, in the most rural places you can imagine, and there are train and bus and local kind of minibus and taxi services to get you anywhere you want to go for very little money. There are even places where you can only get to through shared transportation. You can't get there through a car, like some of the parks there in the Highlands. So it's not impossible if we change how we think and if we incentivize some of these options and if we stop making it so damn complicated with all of our rules and rules and rules and rules and rules. Like, there's plenty of people who would run kind of a private Uber service in the valley, you know, to pick up and drop off people like Freewheelin' does, if we made it easier for them to do so and, you know, dealt with some of the liability issues. So those are just two suggestions.
So that is the end of our discussion for tonight, simply due to time. And I love that last comment so much because it speaks to what Corey said in the beginning, which is that the greatest expertise is sitting right here in the room. And it's only through really coming together, through engaging in public processes, but also by coming up with innovative and creative ideas outside of, you know, these bigger meetings and then bringing them forward into the community that we're going to achieve change here. So thank you for everybody who shared. And to keep the momentum going, I just wanted to reiterate the action steps that you can come away from tonight with. So number 1 is to sign up for Ridge to River by that wall over there, and that is our local task force to continue this climate resilience and preparedness conversation. Please check out the energy coordinators table way in the back and sign up for their energy list to learn more, particularly about the upcoming weatherization campaign and other efforts. As I mentioned before, the Planning District's Transportation Advisory Committee has a lot of initiatives coming up this fall and beyond, so that will be on mrvpd.org where you can find our contact. And then, if you feel so called, we have sap buckets I believe, by the bar and on the other wall, and your donations help make these events freely accessible to all in the future. So we are so grateful that you came out tonight and want to leave you again with this sense that we are strongest as community. So as I said before, you know, we'll only be as bikeable and walkable as we make our community, and the same goes for prioritizing climate planning. It will only be a priority if we make it one at every meeting, you know, at every conversation. So I believe we can do it, and I'm excited to go forward and join the community in continuing the conversation. So to conclude, just please join me in thanking again Jane and Marian for sharing their expertise tonight. Thank you. And the bar will be open until 8 so that we can all keep this conversation going right now. Thank you.